So you talk about Cloud Hands as a way to sort of encapsulate a lot of the different things that you do internally and externally when you practice Tai Chi. Can you say a little bit about why Cloud Hands is?
It's really primarily because Cloud Hands is one of the few movements in the Tai Chi form that has both internal and external symmetry. And that's why it's a very good model for how you change and how you do different things, because in a sense, it's one of the simpler places where it takes place. As an example, the opening movement, commencement. Commencement teaches you how to do different things internally, and it does it through this nice vertical circle, but it doesn't incorporate turning your waist. It doesn't incorporate stepping. And so it ultimately is not a complete paradigm. It's a partial paradigm for it. Cloud Hands, which contains all those internal changes that are done in commencement, albeit in a slightly different pattern, but they're done. It's symmetrical, side to side, although the two sides are out of phase by sort of 180 degrees as a way to think about it, at least conceptually. But it also, really importantly, contains weight shifting and stepping. And if you go to the Tai Chi classics, there's what are the 13 postures. There's 8 basically postures or jins, and there's 5 stepping methods. And Cloud Hands is the posture that is associated with the Zongding stepping method, which is turning and stepping around your center. And because of that, actually all the other stepping methods are actually derivatives from that methodology. Cloud Hands teaches you quite clearly how that methodology of stepping is related to the other changes that are going on in your body. And it goes back to symmetry. Because of the symmetry, you can get to it a lot easier than you can elsewhere in the form. And that's really why I decided to use Cloud Hands as a model for understanding.
So the symmetry and the repetition make things clear that you would really easily miss if you're just doing that.
Very easily miss, and it's extremely difficult for people in the learning process to kind of attach these different kind of internal practices to something that is as varied as it actually is throughout the form.
Is there, inside of Cloud Hands, in terms of the learning process, is there a developmental progression for the different types, what you sort of call the 3 types of power that Cloud Hands?
Yeah, there is. There is. And although I don't think it's progressive in the sense that like you master part A, then you start part B, and then you start part C. I think it's more like there's no reason you couldn't be working on some of the aspects of like the Zongding power, which is really kind of the most central, but also probably the last to develop right away. But the fact is, it's not going to really develop until a lot of what happens in the cross-body power and a lot of what happens in the left and right alignments and the power that comes from your joints is pretty well developed. So it's not that you can't work on it and make progress with it, but until those other things are in place, it's not going to kind of really come to fruition. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It has to do with some of the more advanced practices and stuff that just, you've got to have like certain alignments together, and I mean really precisely, not just kind of sort of there. They've got to be very, very precise, and you've got to have a lot of capacity to like really articulate your spine, and you have to have a lot of capacity to open and close all your joints, and you have to be able to do all those really consistently and harmoniously through your entire system. And so, I mean, in the book I kind of worked through it. I mean, there's places where, you know, there might be a piece that if it went before it or after it, it wouldn't really matter very much. But the basic progression, I think, kind of needs to be there, because you need to kind of develop the foundation of internal strength that comes from developing what I call cross-body power before you can really develop the subsequent ones. And cross-body power is, in a simple sense, It's the one that you see in most Tai Chi books. Like they draw a picture.
It's easiest to diagram.
It's easiest to diagram. Well, actually, the left-right is pretty easy to diagram too, but the cross-body biceps is the most common one. And the reason is because it's the one that's really associated with what is going on with your waist. So the simplest element of kind of cross-body power is your waist turning. And how your waist turning is coordinated with how your weight shifts, which is very important, and how your turning of your waist is coordinated with how your body gets stretched and lengthened and released. So those kind of two things in terms of your waist movement are very important. Well, there's another aspect to cross-body power as well, which is unfortunately often overlooked. And if you think about it, if I'm trying to get power from like one leg up around my back and out through the other hand, which is kind of basically what you're doing. If my torso only turns, but it doesn't expand and contract, if my waist is basically just a rotation rather than a rotation and a compression expansion, what happens is I don't nearly as efficiently transfer power from my lower body into my upper body. And because of that, what happens is I can kind of simplify Tai Chi and make it cylindrical.
Yeah.
And that's fairly efficient. It actually can be quite efficient at handling force that's basically working more or less in a horizontal plane. But if I want to handle force that's working in other dimensions, like vertically and stuff, I really have to have a capacity for my body to move in that direction and it be integrated with what's happening in my legs and waist. So that's the other component that's very important in the cross-body training that probably 90% of the people doing Tai Chi, they don't even do it.
That sounds really interesting. I mean, you're talking about it from the point of view of internal strength, power generation, handling forces. But when you talk about the middle of the body, going like this, what I immediately think of are that's where a lot of your internal organs are.
Exactly, and that comes back to why it's important as a health practice.
Yeah.
Because it's not the complete kind of thing that goes on with your organs,
Okay.
but it's an important step and it's an important piece to have. Ultimately, everything kind of moves in these kind of oblique ellipses and circles through your abdominal cavity. But at first, the difference between doing this and doing this is different because you're working different dimensions. Well, if you're doing both simultaneously, you start developing these kind of pulls and compressions that massage and loosen up your organs. And it begins to develop that. And it's not that if you just relax and you stay really loose and you turn, you get some of that.
Yeah.
You just don't get as much. And the place where, from a martial standpoint, what happens is you tend to be able to like project power through certain angles pretty efficiently,
Yeah.
but you don't have as much range of where you can do it.
Interesting.
And so it's in some ways it kind of just limits kind of the capacity you have. And so that's another reason for making sure you get that connection. What it also does, it also starts working to develop a coordination between what's happening in your spine and what's happening in your legs and waist. And if you do it as a static kind of torso practice, you don't develop that. You don't engage your spine. I mean, you do, but it's static. It's like you have this kind of lump here that's not moving.
Yeah.
And as opposed to your spine actually is quite articulate and quite strong.
So is it fair to say the other powers, the way you're talking about them in the book and the way you describe them, all maximize other sort of health benefits of the practice?
Yeah, I mean, they all contribute to one another.
Yeah.
I mean, in one sense, if you go to the next, which really happens along the left and right sides of your body, and it has to do with kind of how everything twists in and out. Well, from a health standpoint, what you're doing is you're learning to close and open all the joints and all the cavities in your body. And from a health standpoint, that has a lot to do with just kind of the health of your joints and everything. And the flip side of it is from a martial standpoint, it helps you heal stuff a lot faster. Because if you really engage martial arts, you're going to get hurt. Yeah. If you think you're not going to get hurt, you're fooling yourself. And you haven't done it. If you haven't been hurt. So you're going to get hurt, and having that capacity really increases your ability to heal yourself. And on like soft tissue injuries, joint injuries, things like that. It's really very, very productive for that type of thing. The other thing that it does, and this is, I kind of talk about this a little bit in the book. This is kind of the place where I say, you can do the cross-body power stuff, and you can do it just purely as biomechanics. And it's quite effective. It's actually very efficient, and actually I allude to this in the book, but a good example of this, if you want to see it, watch the documentary When We Were Kings, which was the Foreman Ali documentary that was done before the fight in Zaire. And there's a scene where they show Foreman hitting a heavy bag. And it's the biggest heavy bag that you get. Like, they're about 150 pounds. And he's hitting it, and he has basically indented it like there was like a basketball or a watermelon where he's hitting it. And what George Foreman did very, very well is exactly what cross-body power is. Yeah. So it's not like it's weak by any stretch of the imagination. It can be very powerful. And the second thing that you want to try to incorporate there, and this is the left-right kind of alignment stuff, starts becoming, it starts kind of getting into the range where there's physical aspects to it, like there's certain alignments you really need to kind of put in place. But there's also kind of some more energetic things that don't really necessarily have a real good physical counterpart. And it's kind of the first place where you really start kind of encountering that. As an example, if I'm like doing something like on the left side of my body, the other left side, and it creates like a twist and a spiral like down to the ground. Yeah. Well, and I could reverse that and bring it up. Well, eventually this starts actually stimulating the chi in my body to kind of start doing the same type of thing. But it does it actually probably at a different pace than my physical tissue, because I can't actually make my physical tissue twist like this. But it helps induce it. And so at some point it's physical, but it also has these other components energetically that is starting to really develop.
It seems like just another really solid argument for having a simplified container like Cloud Hands to explore that stuff, where you could just do the form forever.
It's very easy, very, very easy to do the form for a long, long, long time and not access this stuff because of the complexity of it. Because, from ward off in the very beginning of the form, or play guitar if you're doing Wu style, you're asymmetrical. Yeah. You're doing different things on different parts of your body. And the whole point of why you're doing them the way you're doing them is to maximize power at a particular place, or to maximize the absorption of power from a particular place. And so that whole kind of matrix that's the martial side of it is what really dictates the shape. And it also dictates the internal configuration. And so this is why, on one level, you can do Tai Chi purely as a health practice, but you're not going to understand why you're doing a particular thing, and you probably won't even really do the particular thing really precisely, because you just don't have a sense of where it's going and what its function is.
So, because of the way that Tai Chi develops, more precision with the martial arts and applications means you're getting a better return on your health practice.
Yeah,
is that a fair statement?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The people I've met who really have the health stuff of Tai Chi really well developed were all very respectable martial artists. Those are the people who have that most developed.
So we've talked about sort of 3 different types of power you're trying to integrate. We've pared it down to a really simple movement, or a simplified movement pattern compared to the form. I'm starting to wonder about sort of the mindset it takes to organize all that. experience on it. Is that sort of where the meditation comes into this sort of practice?
No. No. I mean, the third piece of the power components, which is really the Zongding, and the power that's associated with gathering into and discharging from your Zongding, it doesn't really have a physical counterpart.
Okay.
I mean, yes, if you take your Zongding, it roughly is through the center of your body. If you align certain things correctly, you can get your lower dantian to be aligned with your Zongding, although most people don't have enough flexibility to probably do that, but you can. It's purely internally energetic. And there's things you can do, like some of the exercises I teach people to train that, have to do really what's happening with your mind and your internal, your chi, not what you're doing with your body. And to take that and actually have that ultimately become kind of the foundation of your strength has to do with a couple different things. One, it has to do with becoming very physically aware of how you're turning, so that you don't turn randomly. You turn very precisely around that center. And this is true whether you're like expressing cross-body power or left-right power or the power of the Zongding. The turning is very precise around your center. And what you will watch, this is one of the things as you get more practice, you can watch somebody doing your form. If their center's wobbling around, they don't have it. It's not developed. So that has to be very clear and very stable. Because if it's not clear and stable on a physical level, there's too many internal breaks to be able to do anything with it internally. If your kind of external structure isn't there, the internal isn't going to be there. And so this is one of the reasons why I also really advocate doing some sort of moving practice, and the Cloud Hands is an example of that. You know, like some of the other things I do, like the catwalk, is another example of it. But you have to have something that allows you to go from what you develop energetically while you're sitting and standing and take that into motion. Otherwise, you tend to just jump into the form, and the things you're doing internally in meditation practice are gone. Well, in terms of kind of health and martial, meditation is very important. And I'm going to, at least for a moment, to kind of address them as separate things, although they're really intertwined. From a health standpoint, meditation is very important because it develops a lot of sensitivity to what's going on inside of you. And if you want to be able to kind of fix something, you got to be able to feel it. If you can't feel it, you can't fix it. Well, most of us feel things because we have pain reactions, rather than feeling things that aren't painful. Well, through meditation, you actually learn to feel a lot of things that aren't pain reactions. And you learn how those things actually end up being interrelated with pain reactions. And if you want to become really efficient at kind of healing yourself, or for that matter, if you're doing some sort of healing of somebody else, you've got to be able to distinguish those two. And so because what you want to be able to do is you want to utilize what is energetically strong and use it to help what's injured. And so you have to be able to read those things, and you have to be able to map those things in yourself. And if you can't map them yourself, you're not going to be able to map them to somebody else. I mean, it's sort of a chicken or egg kind of thing, because as you develop it in both aspects. But, you know, certainly you can't, if you can't feel what's going on in your own body, you ain't going to feel what's going on in somebody else's.
Do you mean from a martial arts point of view?
Well, no, from a health point of view. Well, also from a martial arts standpoint. And from a standpoint of martial arts versus health practice, I mean, if I'm doing something with somebody, I may almost do the identical thing. But it's a lot of ways governed by my intent. In other words, I could do something, if you had like a vertebrae that was out of alignment, for instance. Well, I could do something with your arm that would attach to that vertebrae and manipulate it. Well, if I'm doing that to help you, I'm going to be manipulating it so it's trying to bring it back, coax it back into alignment.
Yeah. If
I'm doing it martially, I'm going to do just the opposite. I'm going to try to jerk it really hard so it messes it up completely. So that's why it's very different in terms of your intent. In terms of feeling into the person and feeling what's inside of you, it's the same thing. There's not really any difference. It's a question of whether you feel it or not. But in terms of how you're applying it, it's very different.
And so much of that comes back to having a sitting practice, having a standing practice, where you begin to...
Yeah, I mean, they're very important for just kind of getting your brain to get out of... The problem with the form, from the standpoint of just practicing form, which is you got to do, but if you just practice form, it's so many things that distract you from listening to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's the value of doing something like Cloud Hands as sort of a practice that bridges a lot of the things you get from sitting and brings it into motion, but it does it in a much more simplified context than most other places in the form. The other side to Cloud Hands, I think, also was kind of one of the things that initially kind of got me interested in just kind of exploring this a lot more, is if you talk to a lot of people who've done Tai Chi a long time, they'll all say, oh yeah, Cloud Hands. They may not have any idea why Cloud Hands seems really kind of special, but almost universally they go, yeah, there's something there that's going on that I can't quite put my finger on it, but I know it's there. Yeah. And well, what's going on is it's this hidden relationship between the symmetries of what you're doing externally and internally. And so that's, in one way, what makes it very special, because you just don't have that elsewhere. I mean, actually, there's a couple of ways you do. Pulse Monkey has it. Trying to think.
Any of the other sort of repetitive stepping in?
Well, no, they're really asymmetric, much more so. I mean, both Cloud Hands and Repulse Monkey are asymmetric. Repulse Monkey even more so than Cloud Hands. The beauty of Cloud Hands is what's going on the two sides of your body are basically the same thing. They're just out of phase with one another. Whereas, like in Repulse Monkey, you're not doing the same thing on both sides. There's a symmetry around it, but externally there's a symmetry, but internally there's actually not a symmetry.
So it sounds like a lot of what we're talking about is all a question of degree. Sort of, how do you get things to integrate a little bit more smoothly? Mm-hmm. How do you get one facet of the practice, the health, to tune up, sort of make you more sensitive, or give you insight into the meditation side? Or mm-hmm. how do you use the martial arts to maximize the health benefits? Mm-hmm. So what's really common, though, is that a lot of people come to Tai Chi as a practice for just one of those reasons. So what would you say to somebody who's in that kind of situation?
Well, I mean,
doesn't want to put gloves on and a heavy bag the same
right,
way, or doesn't
right.
have a sitting practice.
Right. I do it. Do it. It just means you're probably ultimately not going to get all the pieces. And as an example of that, if I come into Tai Chi as a martial practice, yeah. I have no interest in meditation. I don't care about the health practices. Yeah. Well, I'm probably not going to get very much of the meditation benefit. I'm going to get a little bit probably, because simply to be effective as a martial artist, even if you're not trying to, you have to have some degree of being able to kind of calm your mind, yeah. and keep your minds kind of still when you're in the heat of things. So you're going to get some of it. You may not get all of it, but you're going to get some of it. You're not going to get the more what I would refer to as kind of esoteric things that the correct meditation practices allow you to do martially. But you're going to get that kind of core basic stuff. Same with the health. Let's say my only interest is doing Tai Chi martially. Well, I'm going to get a lot of health benefits from it. Because in order to effectively do it martially, I have to be able to do all these things. I have to be able to get my waist really open. I have to get my pelvis really open. I have to have a very, very good connection between what's going on in my lower and upper body. I have to integrate that movement. Otherwise, it's martially ineffective.
Right.
And so I have to do all those things that are the things you do that make Tai Chi work for your health. So if you do it martially, you're going to get a huge amount of the health benefits. There might be a few little things here and there that you might tweak a little more if you're just purely practicing as a health practice. But by and large, you might even get, the people who really get the full health benefits are the people who also do it martially, because it opens their body up in a way that just doing it as health practice doesn't happen. You get like 80% there, you get 85% there, but you don't. And the real difference is, and this also comes back to the kind of correlation with meditation. You don't deal with the level of adversity when you're doing it as a health practice that you're doing it when you're doing it as a martial art. And so it constricts your mind in some ways. Your mind doesn't get as loose and opened up. And your chi doesn't get as loose and opened up.
From the lack of that.
From the lack of just kind of psychologically and energetically dealing with confrontation.
Yeah. No, that's sort of the equivalent of always just lifting a 1-pound weight and expecting to get stronger at some point.
Right. I mean, it's not that you don't get a lot from it, because you do.
Right.
But you just don't quite get that last really big jump, because too many things are still bound up energetically and physically.